Pam Bondi's unexpected moment of grace leaves nations speechless. Former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi took viewers by surprise during a nationally televised interview when she brought up Pope Robert Prevost in what was initially a routine political segment. What began as standard discussion about her recent appointment to a presidential law enforcement commission quickly took a personal and emotional turn. The turning point came when the host challenged Bondi's faith-driven perspective. Rather than deflect, Bondi opened up about a profound personal connection to Pope Prevost's humanitarian work in Peru. Her heartfelt story caught everyone off guard, bringing a stunned hush over the studio and moving even the most seasoned political commentators to tears. In that moment, the conversation shifted beyond politics. It became a shared human experience, a reminder of dignity, compassion, and the unseen threads that connect us all. It was a rare, unguarded exchange that broke through the usual partisan noise and revealed something deeper. Bondi had been touring the media circuit to speak about her new role on the President's Law Enforcement Commission. Known for her firm conservative stances and experience as a sharp-minded prosecutor, she was expected to face tough questions. And National Focus, hosted by the hard-hitting Marcus Winters, was known for its adversarial tone and no-holds-barred questioning of guests across the political spectrum. Winters, known both for his rigorous style and his role in fueling national polarization, had prepared for another combative encounter. But the interview turned into something entirely unexpected. Pam Bondi arrived at the studio 30 minutes before the segment began, fully prepared for policy talk, but ultimately delivering a message that transcended politics and reminded the nation of our shared humanity. Pam Bondi's quiet moment before a national spotlight revealed a deeper truth the night before her televised appearance. Pam Bondi meticulously prepared with her team, running through possible questions on hot-button issues like immigration policy and election security. The producers of National Focus had assured her the interview would center on her recent appointment to a presidential commission and might briefly address Supreme Court developments. But what Bondi didn't share with her team, or the show's producers, was the small silver medallion tucked inside her pocket. It wasn't just a token. It was a deeply personal relic from a transformative experience in Peru 15 years ago, one that had quietly shaped her beliefs. The medallion had been given to her by then-Bishop Robert Prevost, now recently elevated to Pope following his predecessor's sudden resignation. Though the story behind it remained private, its meaning never faded. From the green room, Bondi listened as host Marcus Winters grilled a Democratic senator in his usual confrontational style. Interruptions flew, the tone sharp. Exactly what National Focus was known for. Combative exchanges that prioritized spectacle over substance. We're with former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi in 3 minutes. A production assistant called out, handing her a bottle of water. Bondi nodded silently, aware that what awaited her was more than just another TV spot. In today's hyperpolarized media landscape, a single moment, one facial expression, one out-of-context quote, could be spun, shared, and dissected for days. The line between visibility and vulnerability had never been thinner. Just before stepping onto the set, Bondi instinctively touched the medallion in her pocket. She hadn't intended to speak about faith. These were personal matters, often twisted for political ends. But she also knew that the most powerful moments in life aren't always rehearsed, they're revealed. And sometimes, the truth that resonates most isn't in the talking points, but in the stories we almost didn't tell. What happened on air wasn't in the script. Pam Bondi's interview took a turn no one expected. The studio lights blazed as Pam Bondi took her seat across from Marcus Winters. Though his expression wore the familiar mask of politeness, his eyes told the real story. He wasn't there for a thoughtful exchange, he was hunting. Hunting for a slip, a soundbite, anything he could spin into headlines and viral clips. Live in 5, 4, 3. The floor director counted down silently. With flawless timing, Winters faced the camera. We're back with former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi, recently named to the President's Commission on Law Enforcement. Attorney General Bondi, welcome to National Focus. No one in that studio, not the crew, not the host, and certainly not the millions watching, could have predicted what would unfold in the next few minutes. At first, it all went by the book. Winters launched into pointed questions about her appointment, zeroing in on controversial topics like police reform and accountability. Bondi remained poised and professional, her responses careful and composed, delivering just enough without giving too much. Your commission has been accused of siding too closely with law enforcement, Winters pressed, his tone sharpening as he leaned in. Critics say you're not truly committed to tackling systemic issues. How do you respond? The commission brings together a wide range of voices. Marcus Bondi replied evenly. Our mission isn't to shield institutions from criticism, but to strengthen the trust between communities and those sworn to protect them. The exchange continued in that rhythm, Winters probing for cracks, Bondi holding the line with diplomacy. It was classic political television, direct, high stakes, and controlled. But beneath the polished surface, something was stirring, something no one could anticipate. A shift was coming, one that would take the conversation beyond policy points and into something raw, real, and deeply human. And when it came, it would pierce through politics entirely. Pam Bondi's unexpected revelation on live TV stuns the nation. The interview had, until that point, followed a predictable rhythm, typical of morning political programming. Nothing out of the ordinary. Viewers at home were likely half-watching, sipping coffee, checking their phones, and bracing for another forgettable segment. Then came a pivot that would change everything. Let's talk about your recent comments on immigration, Marcus Winters said, his tone sharpening. You've suggested that faith-based values should guide our approach to border security. Isn't that crossing a line, imposing religious doctrine on public policy? Bondi paused, calmly but deliberately. I believe human dignity should be at the heart of every policy discussion. That belief is informed by my faith, yes, but it's also a universal value, not confined to religion. Winters sensed an opening. But not everyone shares that framework. The new Pope, Robert Prevost, has taken a more progressive stance on social issues. Doesn't that undermine the conservative religious arguments you're aligning yourself with? The moment the Pope's name was mentioned, something shifted in Bondi's expression. Subtle, but unmistakable. Her hand moved briefly to her jacket pocket, brushing the fabric where a small silver medallion lay hidden. Actually, Marcus, she began, her voice quieter now, more intimate. I met Robert Prevost long before the world knew him as Pope. Now Winters leaned in, not to challenge, but to listen. This was no longer about talking points. 15 years ago, Bondi continued, I went to Peru during a time of deep personal loss. My brother had died suddenly. I was adrift, questioning everything. My career, my faith, my purpose. The studio, usually a space of sharp debate and interruption, fell still. I was part of a legal advisory group assisting with adoption law reforms. I wasn't seeking anything spiritual, but I was clearly struggling. One evening, after a particularly hard day, I sat alone in the mission courtyard. That's when then Bishop Prevost found me. Bondi's voice held steady, but her eyes reflected the weight of the memory. He didn't know who I was professionally, he only saw someone in pain. He sat beside me for hours as I poured out my grief. He never preached. He just listened. He acknowledged the depth of my loss without trying to fix it. That alone changed something in me. Winters, known for interrupting, didn't say a word. It was no longer an interview. It had become a moment of shared humanity, raw, unfiltered, and unforgettable. Pam Bondi's poised interview turns into a powerful testament to humanity. What had started as just another political Q&A had now become something far more powerful, a raw, unscripted human moment unfolding live before millions. So when you ask about Pope Prevost's stance on social issues, Bondi said, her voice steady but growing in conviction, I don't think in terms of conservative or progressive labels. What I saw in him was something deeper, a commitment to human dignity that transcends politics. The energy in the studio shifted, not from confrontation, but from the unmistakable weight of sincerity. The usual edge of televised debate had been replaced by silence, respectful, focused, real. A few production assistants stood still behind the cameras, visibly moved. Even Marcus Winters, famed for his poker-faced professionalism, leaned back, his expression softened, almost reverent. But what came next would elevate the moment from meaningful to unforgettable. Sensing the gravity of what was unfolding, Winters did something rare. He paused his usual interrogation and asked a simple question. What did you see him do in Peru that stayed with you all these years? Bondi met his eyes, no longer speaking as a political figure, but as a person changed by something profound. There's something I've never spoken about publicly, she said, her voice quieter now. But it's influenced nearly every decision I've made since. Most wouldn't trace my public work back to this, but it's there, always guiding me. She drew a breath. Bishop Prevost had started a reconciliation program in a part of Peru still scarred by political violence. This was a place where people had lost everything: families torn apart by bloodshed in the 1980s and 90s. Former enemies, men and women whose relatives had killed each other, were brought together to rebuild their community, side by side. The studio fell completely still. Not a camera moved. Not a breath was heard. Bondi continued, her words now carrying the full emotional gravity of memory. I saw people who had every reason to hate each other, every justification for bitterness, lay down their pain for the sake of something greater. It wasn't easy. It was messy and heartbreaking. But it was real. And it worked. In that moment, politics melted away. This was no longer about policy debates or ideological scorekeeping. It was about forgiveness, restoration, and the unexpected ways personal experience can shape public service. A studio stilled by truth. Pam Bondi's emotional recollection leaves audience in tears. Even the usually busy studio crew, camera operators, assistants, tech staff stood frozen in place. No one moved. No one spoke. Pam Bondi's voice was steady, but her eyes shimmered with emotion as she shared a moment etched into her soul. One day, she said, a mother confronted the man responsible for her son's death during the conflict. Everyone expected fury, maybe even a violent outburst. But instead, after a long, unbearable silence, she asked him to help rebuild the school her son once attended. It had been destroyed in the violence. The silence in the studio grew heavier. Every word felt sacred. Bishop Prevost created a space where justice and mercy didn't cancel each other out. Bondi continued. Where holding someone accountable didn't mean denying them the chance to change. That man worked beside that grieving mother for 2 years. I watched them, day after day, transform something dark into something light. Their relationship, once rooted in unbearable pain, became, in time, a kind of sacred recognition, a mutual acknowledgement of each other's humanity. By now, tears were visible across the studio. A production assistant discreetly wiped her cheeks. Even Marcus Winters, normally the embodiment of journalistic detachment, sat still, visibly moved. The final day I was there, Bondi said, her voice unwavering, was the dedication of the newly rebuilt school. That same mother stood before a gathered crowd. She shared her journey from vengeance to reconciliation. And she said something I've carried with me ever since. Justice without the possibility of redemption is just another form of violence. Bondi held up the silver medallion again, its simple shine now glowing with meaning. When Bishop Prevost gave me this, she said, he told me that true power, whether in government, religion, or any institution, exists not to punish endlessly, not to divide people into the worthy and unworthy, but to create the conditions where broken things can be made whole again. A single tear traced her cheek, caught by the camera's unflinching lens. Yet her voice never faltered. What moves me most, she said, isn't just the memory. It's knowing that the man who helped me see justice through that lens is now the Pope. Someone who understands that our most important political and spiritual questions aren't theoretical. They live in how we treat one another in our weakest, most wounded moments. Live on air, a political interview turns into a moment of shared grief, and healing. What happened next stunned the entire studio. Marcus Winters, long regarded as the unshakable, impersonal face of political interviewing, broke character. His voice, usually sharp and measured, softened. My brother died of addiction 3 years ago, he said quietly. I've been angry at the system, at him, at myself, at everything. What you're describing, it's what I've been searching for. Some way to carry the pain without erasing it. It was an unprecedented breach of journalistic convention. The camera, which by every protocol should have cut away, instead lingered, locked on Winters' face. The director, recognizing the gravity of the moment, let it play out in silence. Pam Bondi nodded gently. That's why Pope Prevost matters beyond the boundaries of faith, she said. He offers something we're all starving for, proof that our deepest wounds don't have to divide us. They can become the ground we build a more compassionate world on. In the control room, the producer's voice crackled through Winters' earpiece. We need to cut to commercial. But in a quiet act of defiance, Winters removed the earpiece and placed it on the desk. No, he said, turning not just to Bondi but to the camera, to the audience watching across the country. We need to hear this. Not as Democrats, not as Republicans, but as people, just people, trying to make sense of a broken world. Then something even rarer happened. Bondi reached across the desk, crossing the invisible line between guest and host, and briefly touched Winters' hand. It wasn't theatrical. It was instinctive, human. Bishop Prevost, Pope Prevost now, taught me that the most powerful response to suffering isn't policy or ideology, she said. It's presence. Just being there. standing beside someone in their pain without trying to fix it, justify it, or turn it into a platform. The camera slowly pulled back to reveal the entire studio. Several crew members were openly crying. The tension and performance of television production had vanished. What remained was something rare: truth. This wasn't a political battle. It wasn't Bondi versus Winters. It was humanity breaking through the scripted machinery of media. And what had been exposed wasn't scandal or contradiction. It was something far more powerful, a collective longing for meaning, healing, and reconciliation that crosses every ideological divide. When the show finally cut to commercial, several minutes behind schedule, social media had already erupted. Viewers across the country flooded platforms with stunned reactions. They hadn't just witnessed an interview. They had experienced a national moment of emotional catharsis. Pam Bondi's interview sparks national reflection, and global ripples. The impact of Pam Bondi's interview was swift, sweeping, and deeply felt. Within hours, the emotional segment had gone viral, racking up millions of views across every major social media platform. The hashtag Bondi Provost moment began trending nationwide, with people from all political backgrounds sharing how the conversation had touched them, some describing it as life-changing. Initially, Marcus Winters' network was alarmed by his uncharacteristic departure from journalistic detachment, but that concern quickly gave way to recognition. Something extraordinary had happened, something that couldn't be ignored. The network made a rare decision. The entire unedited interview was rebroadcast during prime time that evening. It shattered ratings records. Analysts and commentators scrambled to make sense of what they had witnessed. Was it a political interview? A spiritual confession? A cultural reckoning? In truth, it defied every known category of media analysis. It was something new, a moment of televised humanity that pierced through the noise. For Bondi, the aftermath was both overwhelming and affirming. Requests for speaking engagements poured in, not just from conservative organizations, but from universities, interfaith alliances, and global peace-building coalitions. The small silver medallion she had held up during the interview became an unexpected symbol, referenced in discussions about justice reform, reconciliation, and the healing of political divides. 3 days after the broadcast, Bondi received a personal call from Pope Prevost himself. "Your words honored the people of Peru more than they honored me," he told her. "Thank you for remembering them." Their conversation lasted nearly an hour and rekindled the bond they had first formed years earlier. Before hanging up, the Pope invited her to participate in a Vatican conference on restorative justice the following year. She accepted without hesitation. Meanwhile, Marcus Winters underwent his own transformation. His on-air acknowledgement of his brother's death and his struggle with grief cracked open a new depth within him. While he maintained his trademark tough questioning style, his show began to evolve. He introduced a new recurring segment titled Common Ground, dedicated to exploring issues from perspectives that transcended party lines, focused on stories that connected rather than divided. The Bondi Provost interview didn't just spark headlines. It sparked reflection. It reminded a fractured nation and a fragmented media culture that beneath all the rhetoric and polarization, people are still searching for meaning, mercy, and moments of truth. The Bondi interview taught me something essential about journalism, Marcus Winters reflected in a follow-up conversation weeks later. We become so obsessed with conflict as the engine of engagement that we've forgotten the equally powerful human craving for connection and meaning. More than just a viral media event, the interview sparked something deeper, a national conversation about the role of personal experience in shaping political belief. Political scientists observed a noticeable trend. More public figures began opening up about the real-life events that had influenced their policy positions. The days of purely abstract ideological posturing were giving way to something more grounded, more human. Roughly a month after the broadcast, Pam Bondi published a personal essay that further illuminated her time in Peru. In it, she explained how her first-hand experiences with reconciliation, justice, and forgiveness had shaped her approach to criminal justice reform, an approach that often surprised her political allies. Her so-called tough-on-crime stance, she revealed, was layered with nuance. A belief in accountability, yes, but always paired with the possibility of redemption. For many viewers, the most enduring impact of the interview wasn't the policy talk, it was the vulnerability. In an era dominated by carefully polished personas, seeing both Bondi and Winters drop their professional facades and speak from raw, personal truth had a profound emotional effect. I disagree with Pam Bondi on almost every major issue, one prominent liberal commentator wrote in an op-ed. But watching that interview reminded me, behind every political disagreement is a human being, shaped by experiences I know nothing about. That doesn't change my convictions, but it absolutely changes how I see the people who hold opposing views. 6 months later, the Vatican announced an expansion of the reconciliation initiative Pope Prevost had pioneered in Peru. The new global effort would be launched in regions facing deep political unrest. The announcement credited increased awareness of the Peruvian model, a direct reference to the visibility brought by Bondi's interview. For the National Focus production team, the legacy was bittersweet. The segment had achieved historic engagement, but it had done so not through controversy or spectacle, but through something impossible to script, an authentic human moment. And that kind of moment, they knew, could never be engineered. A year later, Bondi and Winters appeared side by side at a major conference on journalism and civic dialogue. Their unexpected friendship, born from a single televised conversation, had come to symbolize the very possibility that Pope Prevost had once demonstrated in the hills of Peru: connection across difference. What happened in that studio wasn't about politics or religion, Bondi told the audience. It was about something we all know intimately: pain, and the capacity for transformation. Pope Prevost showed that to me years ago in Peru. And somehow, in that moment with Marcus, we passed it on. But perhaps the most powerful legacy came not from institutions or headlines, but from the thousands of messages the network received from ordinary people. Letters, emails, and social media posts poured in from viewers who had watched the interview not once, but multiple times, often with loved ones they hadn't spoken to in years. One such message read, "I watched the interview with my father. We hadn't had a real conversation in years because of politics. But when the two of you started crying, something inside me cracked. Something inside him did, too. We still don't agree on much. But for the first time in a long time, I saw him as a person again, not a set of opinions. That's what your conversation gave us. That's what it gave me." In a divided world hungry for healing, one interview reminded millions that vulnerability is not weakness, and that compassion, not ideology, may be our most powerful tool for change. In a time so often marked by division, the unexpected moment Pam Bondi invoked the name of Pope Robert Prevost offered something rare: a window into what's possible when we treat our deepest wounds not as lines of separation, but as doorways to deeper understanding. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of our shared humanity across political, spiritual, or personal divides, please consider liking and subscribing for more stories that illuminate moments of true connection. And we'd love to hear from you. Have you ever experienced unexpected transformation through a chance encounter or moment of vulnerability? Share your story in the comments below.